Imagine the guy who co-wrote Pulp Fiction.
Right. Quentin Tarantino's creative partner.
Exactly. Roger Avery. He is sitting across the table from Joe Rogan on literally the single most influential podcast platform on the planet.
Which is a massive audience. Just huge.
Oh, massive. And completely out of nowhere, like totally unprompted, Avery compares this obscure, incredibly low-budget fantasy television show to the 1981 cinematic masterpiece Excalibur.
And I mean, that is just a colossal statement. If you study fantasy cinema at all, John Boorman's Excalibur is sacred ground.
It really is.
It's the absolute pinnacle of gritty, atmospheric Arthurian storytelling.
Yeah.
So to invoke that specific film to make that comparison is to make a towering claim about the artistic merit of what you've just watched.
Right. It's an earth-shattering comparison. So here is the genuine mystery, the real puzzle we are unpacking today. Why hasn't anyone heard of this show?
Yeah, it's basically invisible.
It is. You check the standard pop culture websites, you scroll through those weekend watch guides on your phone, you look at Rotten Tomatoes, and it was a complete...
Nowhere to be found.
Exactly. The show is called The Rise of the Merlin. It's a television adaptation of Stephen R. Lawhead's beloved Pendragon cycle novels. And here's the kicker: it was produced by The Daily Wire.
And that last detail, the production studio, is really the absolute epicenter of the friction we are going to explore today.
Oh, 100%.
Because, and we should be clear, our mission with this deep dive is not to give you a simple consumer review.
Right. We aren't here to, critique the costume design or debate the lighting choices.
No, we are going to completely deconstruct this sprawling, multifaceted undertaking from the inside out. We're looking at the grueling mechanics of adapting a deeply philosophical epic into episodic television.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
Almost impossible. We're going to plunge into the terrifying geopolitical reality of post-Roman Britain. And perhaps most intensely, we're going to examine the contentious real-world industry battle over gatekeeping, independent media, and this raging debate over slop versus merit.
But look, before we dive into all of that, I need to make something crystal clear to you, the listener.
Yeah, this is important.
The source material we have stacked in front of us today contains highly politically charged commentary.
Very charged.
Right. We are pulling from essays and interviews by science fiction author John Del Arroz, screenwriters, and cultural critics who are offering blistering, scorched earth critiques of modern Hollywood, the mainstream media, and the broader culture.
And our goal today is to unpack these fascinating arguments completely impartially.
Exactly. We aren't taking sides here.
No. We are not endorsing the viewpoints or the politics of the original sources. We are strictly acting as your guide, mapping out the territory of these arguments so you can understand the underlying mechanic of what is happening in this unprecedented cultural space.
Think of it as a forensic analysis of a cultural flashback.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And our roadmap for this journey starts with the meta-narrative outside the screen, the alleged wall of silence surrounding the show, and the alternative pipeline trying to shatter. From there, we will step into the chaotic, vaporous reality of the writers to see how a story like this is actually built.
Which sounds like a nightmare, honestly.
It really does. Then, we look at the physical toll of the production specifically, the terrifying practical stunts involving live predators.
Which I still can't get over that part.
It's wild. After that, we navigate the geopolitical chessboard of 5th century Britain, the spiritual warfare defining the era, and finally, we end with the heartbreaking psychological unmaking of the legendary wizard himself.
So, let's start with that wall of silence. Because before we can talk about the story on the screen, we have to look at the unprecedented story of how it got there.
And why you, listening right now, might be hearing about it for the very first time.
Exactly. This brings us to a concept presented in our sources by sci-fi author John Del Arroz, which he calls the stacked deck theory.
Right. So Del Arroz, who is an independent creator himself, argues that we are witnessing a fundamental shift in how mainstream media curation operates.
Like a total paradigm shift.
Yeah. He's essentially accusing the entertainment press of employing a strategy of weaponized silence.
Weaponized silence. That's a heavy term.
It is. And to understand how this worked, we really have to look at how media used to function. Historically, if an independent outlet or a major studio released a film that the cultural critics absolutely despised, maybe it had a political message they hated, or it just offended their sensibilities, they would attack it relentlessly.
Right. They would rate scathing 0-star reviews. They would mock it on late-night monologues.
Exactly. They would generate endless think pieces dissecting exactly why it was a moral failure.
But the problem with that strategy is the classic hate watch. Del Arroz argues that the gatekeepers finally realized that a negative review still
It is. It still drives clicks.
Right. It drives engagement, and crucially, it triggers the Streisand effect.
Precisely. And for those unfamiliar, the Streisand effect is named after Barbra Streisand, who once sued to have an obscure aerial photograph of her California mansion removed from a public database.
I always love this story.
It's such a perfect example because before she filed the lawsuit, almost no one on Earth had seen or cared about that photo.
Right, it was just sitting in some boring database.
Exactly. But the moment the lawsuit made the news, hundreds of thousands of people actively sought it out.
The very attempt to suppress the information became the engine that popularized it.
Exactly. Arroz is arguing that the mainstream media apparatus has internalized this lesson. They know that if they publish a front-page hit piece titled, Why the Daily Wire's Fantasy Show is Dangerous,
millions of people will instantly want to watch it out of sheer rebellious curiosity.
Right. It transforms the show into forbidden fruit.
So according to this theory, their new strategy isn't to attack it. It's a conscious, coordinated effort to pretend it simply does not exist, a strategy of total non-existence.
They refuse to review it. They refuse to include it in Roundup. They are actively starving the fire of
Arroz actually uses a brilliant comparison. He points out that even highly controversial political documentaries usually get the courtesy of a bad review and trade.
Right, they at least get acknowledged.
Exactly. But with the rise of the Merlin, it's a complete media black. He describes the agonizing reality of being a creator in this space, pouring millions of dollars and years of your life into a sprawling epic, only to have the people whose entire job it is to cover the entertainment industry simply look the other way.
And the psychological mechanism at play here is fascinating because it acts as a form of cultural gas.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, if the major cultural institutions refuse to acknowledge a piece of art, it struggles to enter the broader cultural lexicon. It isolates the creator and fragments the audience's shared reality.
You feel like you're the only one watching.
Exactly. But as we established right at the top, no wall is perfectly airtight. Which brings us back to that electric moment on the Joe Rogan podcast.
That moment is the crack in the foundation. Because Roger Avery isn't some fringe political pundit trying to score points.
No, he is Hollywood royalty.
Exactly. He understands the architecture of a scene, the pacing of a script, and visual language at an elite Academy Award-winning level.
And he explicitly admits on the podcast that he went into The Rise of the Merlin with incredibly low expectations.
Right. He assumed it would be terrible.
Yeah, and yet he ended up comparing its quality to billion-dollar mainstream productions, noting that it achieved on a shoestring budget what the major studios are currently failing to do with infinite resources.
What makes that endorsement so potent is that it bypasses the political tribal entirely.
It really does. It is a purely merit-based observation from a master of the craft.
And if you watch that specific podcast clip, the most telling part isn't even what Avery says. It's the reaction of the
producers on Rogan's show?
Yeah, guys who are perpetually online, whose literal job is to track internet culture and media trends. They had absolutely no idea the show existed.
That genuine confusion is the proof of concept for Arroz's theory. The blackout is highly effective.
Right. The information simply wasn't flowing through the normal cultural plumbing.
And this leads directly into a blistering critique from Arroz and Lee Blaylock, one of the writers on the show. They frame this entire conflict as the slop versus merit argument.
Which is such a visceral term, slop.
It is. Arroz uses this highly visceral, almost insulting term slop to describe the current output of the major Hollywood studios.
He points to sprawling, bloated projects like Amazon's Rings of Power, right?
Exactly. He argues that these massive corporations are spending billions to produce highly processed, fundamentally hollow content that audiences are just expected to mindlessly slurp up from the trough.
Man, that is harsh.
It is. And Blaylock takes that critique a step further with an incredibly provocative, almost grotesque metaphor.
Oh, right, the skin suits thing.
Yes. He suggests that the current gatekeepers in Hollywood are wearing established intellectual properties like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, or Marvel-like skin suits.
It's an image of creative necrosis.
Yeah, he's arguing that the actual soul, the thematic core of these beloved franchises has been dead for years. The studios are just parading around in the recognizable, decaying skin of the brand to trick a loyal audience into buying a subscription.
They are zombie franchises.
Right. And in stark contrast, Blaylock and Arroz argue that independent creators operating completely outside that ecosystem are producing high-merit, structurally sound, nutritious art.
Okay, wait, I need to push back on that.
Go for it.
I mean, I get the frustration with Hollywood, but let's look at the distribution model itself. Is this really a coordinated, malicious conspiracy of silence from the media, or is it just the natural fiction of a bizarre platform bottleneck?
What do you mean by bottleneck?
Well, The Rise of the Merlin is locked exclusively behind the Daily Wire Plus paywall, and the Daily Wire is primarily known as a hard-charging conservative news and political commentary app.
Right, it's a very specific niche.
Exactly. It is a walled garden. Even if the show is a generational masterpiece, isn't it just incredibly difficult to sell an epic fantasy series inside a news app?
That's a fair point.
Think about your own phone right now. Imagine trying to launch the next Game of Thrones exclusively on the CNN app or the Fox News app.
Yeah, that would be strange.
Even if the writing is brilliant and the cinematography is breathtaking, it is a fundamentally weird, counterintuitive place for an audience to look for dragons and wizards.
That is a highly valid structural counterargument. You are talking about the brutal, unsexy mechanics of the distribution pipeline, because it is an immense, perhaps unprecedented challenge to pivot an audience that signed up to hear political debate into an audience that wants to sit down for a slow-burn, historical fantasy epic about 5th century Britain.
It's a massive ask.
It is. You can craft the greatest piece of art in human history, but if it isn't on the app that comes preloaded on everyone's Roku or Apple TV, you are fighting gravity. But and this is important, Arroz actually acknowledges this immense struggle, which is why he views this specific show as a critical battering ram.
The stakes for this alternative ecosystem really are astronomical. Arroz argues that if this show succeeds, and success here is measured purely by its ability to drive new, non-political subscriptions to the platform, it kicks the door open for an entirely new, decentralized galaxy of storytelling.
Right. It proves the model works.
But if it fails to move the needle, that door might slam shut for indie fantasy in this space for a decade. It's a use-it-or-lose-it dynamic.
And this vulnerability is exactly why he pushes so aggressively for physical media. He is basically begging people to buy the DVDs and the Blu-rays.
Which feels so retro, but makes a lot of sense.
The physical media argument is deeply connected to a growing modern anxiety about cultural permanence.
Yeah.
Think about the streaming ecosystem over the last few years. We have seen major platforms outright delete entire television shows for tax write-offs.
Which is just wild to me. It shows that people worked on for years gone.
Vanished. We've seen them retroactively edit older movies to remove dialogue they now deem offensive. Arroz is pointing out that if you don't own the physical disc, you don't actually own the culture you love.
You are merely renting it from a corporation that can alter or erase it at any moment.
Exactly. If you own the Blu-ray, the blockade doesn't matter. The gatekeepers cannot reach into your living room and turn off the art. It is a method of ensuring that alternative culture isn't digitally evaporated.
Okay, so let's say you buy the Blu-ray. You bypass the Hollywood system, you ignore the media blackout, and you sit down to watch this independent.
Right.
How exactly was the story you were watching built? Because according to our sources, stepping out of the world of novels and into the writer's room for this show was basically an act of creative violence.
It really was. And we get a fascinating window into this from Lee Blaylock. Blaylock came from a background in writing novels and comic books, and he articulated the intense culture shock of moving into television production.
He described the process of breaking a television season as
vaporous. Yeah. When you write a novel, you are the absolute autocrat. You're the god of that universe.
Right. You type the words, you control the pace, and the book is finished when you declare it.
But television is an entirely different beast. It is a democracy, or perhaps more accurately, a constitutional monarch, with the showrunner acting as the king.
Vaporous is just such an unsettling word for a creature job. It implies that nothing you build is solid, that you are trying to construct a cathedral out of smoke.
It really captures the anxiety of the writer's room.
And Blaylock highlighted the fundamental friction between the two mediums using a really elegant concept, the oil and water.
Right. People always complain, oh, the book was so much better than the show, but they rarely understand why the translation is so impossibly hard.
Exactly. Blaylock points out that books and television both contain narrative. They both hold the liquid of a story, but they don't mix.
And the core chemical difference preventing them from mixing is pacing.
Pacing is everything.
It comes down to the implicit contract you make with the audience. When a reader cracks open a sprawling fantasy epic like Lawhead's Pendragon cycle, they're settling in for a long, immersive haul.
Right. If the author wants to spend 30 pages exploring the internal philosophical thoughts of a character as they slowly wander through a dense forest, the reader accepts that.
Internal monologue is the superpower of the written word.
But a television viewer is holding a remote control. They have a ticking clock in their head.
Exactly. If a character wanders silently through the woods for 20 minutes on screen, that isn't deep character development. That is dead air.
People will just change the channel.
Right. Visual storytelling requires a setup, a confrontation, and a resolution within a strict, unforgiving 60-minute window.
It requires brutal compression. You have to distill hundreds of pages of intricate history-visual short. And this leads to what Blaylock calls the ripple effect.
The Jenga puzzle.
Exactly. To understand this, imagine building a house of cards. You and the writing team have spent 3 weeks perfectly outlining this. You have all the index cards pinned to the whiteboard.
Everything looks great.
But then you realize a character's emotional breakdown in episode 6 just doesn't feel earned. So you think, okay, no problem, I'll just rewrite that one scene in episode 6.
But it is never just one scene.
Never.
It is less like editing a document and more like performing open-heart surgery on a moving train.
Wow.
Because if you need that character to express a deep-seated fear of fire in episode 6, you have to establish where that fear came from in episode 2.
Right.
But episode 2 is already exactly 48 pages long. The network won't let it be 50 pages.
Yeah.
So to add the new backstory scene, you have to cut an existing scene, perhaps a beautiful, quiet bonding moment between two side characters.
But if you cut that bonding scene, those side characters have no motivation to save each other in episode 4, and that subplot completely falls apart.
Exactly. You reroute one artery in the future and the entire past.
Blaylock noted that to survive in a writer's room, you have to be willing to murder your darlings on an industrial scale. You have to strip away your ego completely.
And this brings us to the most terrifying structural hurdle they faced during adaptation, the passive protagonist problem.
Oh, this is a big...
In Lawhead's original novels, the young Merlin is primarily an observer. He is a thoughtful, sensitive soul to whom things happen.
He is swept away by the tides of war, by the madness of kings, by the overwhelming force.
Right. As a reader, we are living inside his head. So we hear his brilliant internal philosophy and we deeply empathize with his suffering.
But on a screen, a passive lead is absolute poison.
It'll kill the show.
Yeah, if your main character is just standing in the corner reacting while the actual plot happens around him, the audience perceives him as weak, or worse, incredibly boring.
A television protagonist must actively want something and aggressively pursue it.
So the writer's room had to find a solution to this, and they were incredibly decisive.
They were. They fundamentally restructured the timeline of the books to give Merlin agency much earlier in his life.
And Blaylock used a very striking, very modern metaphor to describe this new version of the wizard. He called him a Terminator.
You're right.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I have a real problem with this Terminator. When I first read that in the notes, it sounded almost comedic, like, come with me if you want to pull the sword from the stone.
I mean, I see how it sounds that way.
But more importantly, the whole appeal of Merlin in the books is his mind, his internal complex. If you turn him into a relentless, mission-oriented action hero just to keep TV audiences with short attention spans from getting bored, haven't you just killed the soul of the character?
It's a valid concern.
Doesn't that prove the oil and water theory right, that you can't adapt it without ruining it?
That is the violent, agonizing trade-off of adaptation. Blaylock argues that you have to provide that relentless external drive in the script. Merlin's singular directive becomes finding the High King and uniting Britain because the medium demands motion.
All right, the TV needs him.
Exactly. But you don't lose the soul. You just shift the responsibility for it. You rely entirely on the human actor to bring the quiet humanity, the doubt, and the philosophical nuance back to the screen through their performance.
You write the Terminator, but you cast a poet.
Perfectly said. And that transition from the written page to the physical performance leads us directly into the reality of the production itself.
Right, because it's one thing to write a Terminator on a whiteboard in a comfort. It's entirely another to ask a human being to physically embody that relentless, grueling world in the mud.
It's a whole different ballgame.
And from the sources we have, bringing this world to life meant getting incredibly dirty. This was not a modern green screen CGI fest where actors talk to tennis balls on sticks.
No, they explicitly wanted to depart from the sterile digital fan.
They aimed for a grounded, highly practical, reminiscent of gritty 1990s television shows like Highlander. It was about tangible, physical reality.
And we get a wonderful, highly revealing behind-the-scenes perspective on this from an interview with James Arden, the actor who plays Taliesin.
Taliesin is Merlin's father, right?
Yes. And Arden shared a story that perfectly captures the awkward, unglamorous reality of practical filming.
Oh, the singing story. I love this.
It's great. So in the lore of the story, Taliesin is a legendary bard. He is renowned across Britain for having a singing voice so pure and beautiful that it could literally heal a wounded soul.
Right.
But Arden himself cheerfully admits in the interview that he cannot sing a single note in tune to save it.
I absolutely love this anecdote, because just imagine the scenario.
It's so funny.
You have this sprawling, incredibly expensive set in Budapest. Arden is standing there in full costume, surrounded by dozens of Hungarian background extras who likely don't speak a word of English.
Right.
The director calls action, and Arden just has to belt out this deeply emotional song, horribly off-key.
Butchering it.
Yeah. And the extras have to act as though they are weeping at the sheer majestic beauty of his voice, knowing full well that a professional, angelic-sounding Welsh singer is going to be dubbed over his performance months later in post-production.
It perfectly strips away the magic of Hollywood to show the hilarious, highly mechanical reality of making art.
It really does.
It also beautifully illustrates a concept Blaylock calls writing for silhouettes.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, before a television show is officially cast, the writers are essentially writing dialogue for go. They have a vague, two-dimensional silhouette of who the character is.
Right.
But the moment a real human actor steps into the role, everything shifts. Blaylock specifically highlighted Rose Reed, the actress who plays Karis.
Okay.
Reed is a screenwriter herself. She didn't just passively accept the lines handed. Because she understood narrative structure, she actively fact-checked the logical progression of her scenes.
Making sure the characters' motivations were perfectly aligned with the broader story.
Exactly. The ghostly silhouette became a fully realized, three-dimensional collaborator.
But if we are talking about the physical reality of the set, we absolutely have to talk about the bull dancers of Budapest.
Oh, man.
This part is intense.
When I read this section of the source material, I genuinely had to read it twice. I could not comprehend the insurance liabilities involved here.
It's hard to believe they actually...
There is a massive, sweeping sequence set in Atlantis that involves a traditional, highly dangerous bull dance. Now, in 2024, the standard, legally sane Hollywood procedure would be to put a stuntman in a green motion capture suit, have him jump over a padded foam barrel, and render a terrifying digital bull in a computer 6 months later.
Which is safe.
Totally safe.
Yeah.
But they refused to do that. They brought in live, multi-ton, aggressive bulls, and they hired real professional bull jumpers.
And the rationale behind taking on that immense physical and financial risk comes down to a single critical concept, verisimilitude, the appearance of being true or real.
Blaylock argued, and evolutionary biology would back him up on this, that the human brain is highly evolved to detect the absence of genuine physical danger.
We can spot a fit.
Exactly. No matter how many millions of dollars you spend on the CGI rendering of a monster, your subconscious lizard brain is analyzing the micro movements of the actor.
It knows deep down that the actor was perfectly safe on an air-conditioned soundstage.
Right. When you introduce a live, unpredictable animal into the frame, there is a chaotic, primal energy that algorithms simply cannot replicate.
But here's the detail that gave me absolute chill. They were operating on an incredibly strict time limit for these stunts.
Yeah, and not for the reason you'd think.
Exactly. It wasn't because the bulls were getting tired or fatigued. They had a time limit because the bulls were getting smart.
Which is terrifying.
Right. We are missing the how. If we just say they were dangerous, how were they dangerous? Blaylock revealed that after 3 or 4 takes of a stuntman leaping over the animal, these massive creatures would start to learn the arc of the jumper's flight path.
They weren't just charging blindly like machines.
No, they were actively problem-solving. A bull would stutter step, anticipate where the human was going to land in the dirt, and slightly turn its horns to catch them on the descent. They were adapting in real time to hunt the actor.
That is the defining difference between watching a safely choreographed dance routine and watching a wildlife documentary of an apex predator hunting its prey.
The adrenaline you see on screen isn't acted. It is a genuine physiological response to an animal trying to kill you.
Just imagine the sheer, raw tension pulsing through that set.
Every single person on the crew knew that if a cue was missed by half a second, someone was going to the hospital, or worse.
And that primal, grounded, terrifying danger on the physical set serves as the perfect thematic mirror for the historical reality of the show's setting.
Right.
Because when we step away from the cameras and look at the actual narrative world of the rise of the Merlin, we find ourselves plunged into the geopolitical nightmare of post-Roman Britain.
Let's really set the scene here, because the historical context is the Roman Empire had occupied Britain for centuries.
They were the stabilizing force.
Exactly. They provided the infrastructure, they built the roads, they maintained the aqueducts, they enforced the laws, and most importantly, they provided the military protection of the legion.
And then it just all vanishes.
Yeah. A general named Magnus Maximus decides he wants to be emperor, so he takes the legions across the channel to fight on the continent, and they never come.
Leaving the island completely exposed.
What does that actually look like for the people left behind? It means the roads suddenly aren't safe from bandits. It means coinage becomes worthless because there's no central bank to back it.
It is a slow-motion, terrifying economic and societal apocalypse.
And the resulting power vacuum completely fractures the island. There is a brilliant, haunting line from the text describing this era. There are more kings.
More kings than sheep perfectly captures the hyperlocalization of authority. When the central government collapses, authority becomes incredibly cheap.
Anyone with a sword can be a king.
Right. Every minor warlord or wealthy farmer with a high hill and a wooden palisade suddenly declares himself a sovereign king.
And then into this chaotic, bleeding, fragmented world step two brothers, Aurelius and Uther.
They are the sons of Constans, a previous high king, and they are returning from exile to try and stitch the broken island back together.
But the mathematical reality they face when they arrive is staggering. In episode 5, we see that the local tyrant, Vortigern, is dead.
But the Saxon leader, Hengist, is currently marching south with an invading army of roughly 10 to 15,000 battle-hardened men.
And Aurelius and Uther, standing in the mud and ashes of their recent victory, have an army of exactly 700 men.
Let's just pause and break down that math. It is a 1 to 14 ratio.
That is not an underdog story. That is a suicide pact.
It really is. In standard military strategy, if you are defending a highly fortified, elevated position with thick stone wall, you might pray for a 1 to 3 ratio to have a fighting chance of holding them off.
Facing 14 to 1 on an open field isn't a battle. It is a funeral.
Aurelius is acutely aware that he cannot repel the barbarian invasion alone. He desperately needs the petty kings of the north and west, those guys on the hills with their small militias, to join his banner.
But here is the ultimate rock in a hard place diplomatic scenario. The very people he needs to save the island absolutely despise his family.
Which complicates things just a little bit.
Just a bit. His father, Constans, is not remembered as a noble defender of the realm. He is remembered as a greedy, extortionist tax collector.
At one point, King Gorlas literally spits the truth at them, stating that Constans took more grain from their winter harvest than any Saxon raider ever did.
Which creates an almost impossible diplomatic hurdle. These petty kings, men like Tudri of Meridunum or Gorlas, are not thinking about the grand historical fate of Britain.
No, they are operating on strict short-term survivalism. It is essentially the prisoner's dilemma applied on a national scale.
Right. If a petty king joins the High King's army, he risks the lives of his men and loses his political autonomy.
But if he hides behind his wooden walls, he might survive just one more winter while the Saxons burn his neighbors' crops instead.
And to overcome this deeply entrenched isolationism, the show relies on highlighting the brilliant, contrasting philosophical strategy of brothers.
Right. Aurelius operates as the idealist. In philosophical terms, he is a deontologist.
And Uther operates as the pragmatist. He is a utilitarian. He is the fist to Aurelius's face.
Okay, let's break those terms down so we really grasp the dynamic.
Yeah, a deontologist like Aurelius believes that the rules of morality are the action itself is what matters, regardless of the consequence.
He believes that saving an innocent life is inherently good, even if it mathematically costs you the war.
Uther, the utilitarian, believes the exact opposite. He believes the outcome, the utility, is the only thing that matters. If you have to burn a village to save the kingdom, you strike the match.
And we see this play out perfectly in the narrative. Aurelius receives word that a tiny, impoverished border village is being raided by a scouting party.
Right, and this village has zero strategic value. It offers no gold, no defensible position.
But Aurelius says, what kind of king would I be if I let my people be slaughtered?
He risks his own life and the entire fragile future of Britain to save a handful of nameless peasants, simply to prove his moral legitimacy.
It is incredibly noble, but from a military standpoint, it is utter madness.
Uther, meanwhile, watches his brother bleeding in the mud for nothing and realizes he has to win this war using a completely different rulebook.
And this is where Uther's brilliance truly shines. Uther completely disappears from the physical battlefield and rides alone straight into the main encampment of a massive enemy force led by King Morgan of the Bell.
Which is insane.
Total madness. Uther casually walks into a camp where he is overwhelmingly outnumbered, where he could be executed on the spot or held for a massive ransom, and he weaponizes the fog of war.
He looks King Morgan in the eye and lies with absolute, unshakable, terrifying.
He tells Morgan that his brother Aurelius is not a noble savior, but a bloodthirsty, unpredictable madman.
A berserker who personally slaughtered Vortigern and is currently marching over the ridge with a massive, unstoppable army, itching to burn Morgan's camp to the ground.
Uther frames himself as the exhausted, reasonable brother who is desperately trying to hold back a monster.
And Morgan, terrified by the sheer conviction of the lie and the myth of Aurelius's violence, completely.
Uther wins the battle without ever drawing his sword from its scabbard.
It's incredible. Uther is sitting at a national poker table holding a pair of twos, and he bluffs the entire pot.
It is the ultimate vindication of utilitarian pragmatism. Aurelius bled from his own veins to save one meaningless village. Uther lied through his teeth for 5 minutes and secured an entire kingdom's allegiance.
But watching that dynamic play out raises a really uncomfortable question. Here's where it gets really... How long can Aurelius maintain his image as the shining good king if his entire reign, his entire moral high ground, secretly propped up by the deceit, the manipulation, and the ruthless shadow work of his brother?
It is an incredibly precarious, perhaps even hypocritical foundation for it.
Absolutely.
But the geopolitical maneuvering of the brothers is only half the story, because while they are fighting a physical war for territory against the Saxons and the petty kings, there is a parallel, sweeping theological war happening for the very soul of the island.
And this spiritual battlefield is where the creators of the show make their most explicit, aggressive rejection of modern storytelling trends.
Right. Lee Blaylock and the team are openly critical of the deep-seated nihilism that they feel has infected modern fantasy.
They take direct, unapologetic aim at the cultural legacy of shows like Game of Thrones.
In their view, if you watch an 8-season epic and the ultimate lesson you walk away with is that virtue is a weakness that gets you beheaded, and that ruthless sociopathic power is the only thing that actually matters in life, then that story is fundamentally hopeless.
It degrades the viewer.
Exactly. The Pendragon cycle is attempting a very old-fashioned classical return to moral absolutism.
They are actively trying to restore a narrative universe where good is objectively transcendently good and evil is objectively fundamentally evil.
It isn't just a matter of competing political interests. We see this intense spiritual tension crystallize perfectly in Merlin's interactions with his own native people, the Druids.
Right. Merlin returns to the sacred oak groves, attempting to act as a bridge.
He tries to syncretize ancient, earth-based pagan ways with the newly arriving theology of Christianity.
And to syncretize just means to blend or harmonize two different beliefs.
Yes. Merlin eloquently argues that the Christian god Yazoo is not an invader, but rather the great light that the Druids have been prophesying and seeking for centuries.
He frames the new religion as a beautiful fulfillment of their ancient philosophy, not a hostile.
But the Druids reject his pitch.
Yeah, they are not having it.
And they have a highly visceral, undeniable, physical reason for doing it. They tell Merlin that the priests of this new god aren't showing up to have polite, academic theological debates in the town square.
No, they are arriving with iron axe and they are literally chopping down the sacred ancient grove.
It's a brilliant piece of nuance from the writers. The show doesn't portray the Druids as stubborn, cartoonish villains clinging to the past. It portrays them as genuine victims of cultural erasure, reacting entirely naturally to an invasive, destructive force.
And running parallel to Merlin's theological struggles, we witness a genuinely shocking spiritual pivot from Uther himself.
Uther, the hardened battle chief, the cynical pragmatist who just lied his way to victory, has a quiet, profound revelation.
He reveals to the pagan king Lot that he has been secretly baptized.
And his reasoning is breathtaking for a man of war. He tells Lot that during his time in exile, he stayed with the Christ-like figure of the Fisher King and he came to a shattering realization.
Mercy is stronger than the strength of army.
For a warlord, a man whose entire life has been defined by the application of violence, to recognize the ultimate structural limits of that violence is a seismic shift in his worldview.
He understands that swords can conquer territory, but only mercy and grace can actually build a lasting generational society.
It elevates Uther into an incredibly complex, tragic figure, a man desperately striving for divine grace, while the survival of his people constantly forces him to fall back on deceit.
But while our heroes are grappling with profound questions of theology, mercy, and syncretism, the show takes a hard, deeply unsettling turn into the grotesque with the character of Morgan.
Remember, to establish that strict moral absolutism they wanted, they have to remove the shades of gray from the antagonist.
And they go to extremes.
They really do.
We see Morgan performing visceral, bloody animal sacrifice. She utilizes dark blood magic. And most shockingly, the show heavily codes her interactions with her own son, Lot, as...
And the narrative function of injecting that level of darkness is highly specific.
What do you mean?
By having Morgan actively break the most universal, deeply ingrained human taboos, the writers are sending a glaring signal to the audience. She is not just a political rival with a differing opinion on tax policy or border control.
She is an abomination against the natural order.
Exactly. She represents absolute unyielding corruption. It elevates the conflict. It tells the viewer that the characters aren't just fighting over a piece of land. They're engaged in a cosmic spiritual war for the continued existence of humanity.
I have to admit, though, I agree with John Del Arroz' pushback on this point in his commentary.
Yeah, he had some concerns.
He warns that introducing this level of explicit, grotesque darkness really strains the boundaries of what they are promoting as a family-friendly or at least accessible epic.
It's a fair critique.
It makes you wonder from a writing perspective, does giving a villain absolutely zero redeeming quality, no sympathetic backstory, and having her just do wildly evil things make her a brilliant, terrifying symbol of cosmic chaos? Or does it backfire and just reduce her to a one-dimensional, cartoonish caricature of a bad guy?
It's a very fine, dangerous tightrope for the writers to walk.
It really is.
And the character caught perfectly in the center of that tightrope, suspended between the brutal, deceitful politics of the Brother King and the absolute terrifying spiritual war of the island, is Merlin.
If we want to truly understand the wizard who will eventually shape the golden age of Camelot, we have to look back at the man who was systematically broken and unmade by the... This is my favorite part, Tired, because this is where we completely shatter pop culture cliche.
Forget the kindly old man with the long white beard and the pointy hat shooting sparks from glowing staff.
Right. In episode 6, we explored the missing years, what they call the Wolf Boy.
Merlin completely steps out of the chaos of post-Roman Britain. He abandons the geopolitical chessboard and spends 6 harsh winters living completely isolated with the Hogfolk.
He removes himself from linear time, the political time where kings are assassinated, borders shift, and taxes are collected, and he immerses himself in slow, eternal, cyclical time.
He becomes utterly feral.
Feral. Imagine the psychological shift of living without a clock, without a calendar, without a master for 6 years.
When he finally emerges back into the presence of other humans, he is unrecognizable.
He is covered in layers of dirt, carrying a freshly killed animal over his shoulder, and he completely refuses.
He understands that in a fractured, dangerous world, having a royal identity is a massive live target.
And it is in this feral state that he has a gritty, dark ages meet-cute with a woman named Ganeda.
And Ganeda is not a passive, waiting to be rescued damsel.
Not at all.
When they meet, she is exhausted, struggling to drag the carcass of a massive wild boar that she just tracked and killed herself.
She looks past the dirt and the feral exterior, and she recognizes the dormant power in his hawk.
They end up bringing the boar back to the stronghold of her father, King Castan.
And the atmosphere of Castan's court is designed to show you exactly how brutal this era is.
Almost immediately, we watch Castanin execute a traitor on the spot without a trial.
And he delivers this chilling, unforgettable line to the court, "Babes sleep tonight without their..."
It instantly establishes that this is a world of absolute fatal weakness is death.
But when Merlin's true royal lineage is eventually revealed, the dynamic of the court shifts in a heart.
He is no longer viewed as a dirty savage from the woods. He is suddenly a highly valuable, strategic political asset.
And this revelation sets up the central, agonizing, tragic conflict of Merlin. You see, Merlin wants a simple life. He has tasted the peace of the woods.
He wants to live in a mud hut with Ganeda, eating the berries they forage and the fish they catch, completely insulated from the bloody, endless wars of ambitious men.
But Ganeda is a king's daughter. She was raised in the shadow of the sword. She is fiercely, ruthlessly practical.
She rejects the mud hut fantasy and demands that he claim his inherent power, telling him to ride out and win me a kingdom.
She understands the terrifying reality of their world. A mud hut offers zero protection against a raiding party. In post-Roman Britain, power is the only...
So the universe forces his hand. The Saxons attack Meridunum with an overwhelming, terrifying force of 15,000 men.
And in the desperate defense of the city, Merlin undergoes a horrific taps into the out.
Now, we need to explain what the Awen is. It isn't just a magical superpower where he waves his hand and bad guys fall over.
It is a divine, berserker-like trance.
It is a terrifying, overwhelming sensory overload where he becomes a pure instrument of absolute slaughter.
The sources state that in this trance, he killed 70 men with his own hands.
70 men. Let that sink in. That isn't a highly choreographed 5-minute cinematic sword fight.
That is hours and hours of grueling, exhausting, horrific, close-quarters butchery. The physical and psychological toll of killing 70 humans face-to-face is unimaginable.
He survives the slaughter, he breaks the siege, he wins the kingdom, and he secures his future.
Ganeda is safe, and she's pregnant with his child. By all traditional narrative logic, the hero's journey...
This is the happy ending. The music should swell, credits should roll.
Tragedy strikes in the most senseless, random, unheroic way possible. While they are traveling, their small party is ambushed by nameless raiders.
Merlin is separated from Ganeda. He hears the scream. The script directions simply repeat the word heat, 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 perfectly capturing the blinding panic and the chaotic fire of the ambush.
He fights his way through the brush, but he is too late. He finds Ganeda and his unborn child dead.
They weren't killed in a grand battle between good and evil. They were senselessly, randomly slaughtered by thieves for a piece of jewelry, a golden torque.
And this is the emotional climax of his entire life. This is the absolute crushing failure of power.
Merlin is forced to face the cruel, mocking irony of his existence.
He was given the ability to channel the terrifying power of heaven to slaughter 70 grown men on a battlefield to save a city he didn't even care about. But he could not use that power to save the one single life that actually mattered.
Trauma, not years of academic study reading dusty scrolls in a library, creates the wisdom.
He realizes in that agonizing moment that power is ultimately completely useless if it cannot protect what you love.
It is in this exact moment of absolute shattered vulnerability, while he is quite literally mourning over the bodies of his family, that Uther arrives.
Uther, ever the calculating utilitarian pragmatist, sees an opportunity.
He tries to manipulate Merlin's raw grief. He tries to hand Merlin the High King's sword, urging him to channel his rage and his pain to unite the tribes and seize the throne of Britain.
But Merlin refuses. He rejects the path of the conqueror.
He refuses to play the geopolitical game because a man who wanted to build a family and a kingdom died in the dirt with Ganeda.
He accepts his fate as a solitary, wandering kingmaker because he has absolutely nothing left to live for.
So what does this all actually mean? Why does this specific tragedy matter to the broader myth?
If you take a step back and look at the whole, the implications are...
Think about it. If those raiders hadn't attacked, if Ganeda had lived, Merlin would have settled down.
He would have been a happy, content, minor king in a forgotten corner of the north. He never would have guided.
He never would have mentored a young boy named Arthur. There would be no Round Table. There would be no Camelot.
The greatest legend in British mythology, the foundational bedrock of the Arthurian epic that has inspired Western culture for 1,000 years, is built entirely on the fragile foundation of a grieving husband's broken heart.
It is a devastating, beautiful realization that completely reframes how we understand the entire myth.
It really is. So we have taken quite the journey today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started by looking at the cutthroat, real-world industry battles outside the screen, the weaponized silence of the media, and the independent pipeline desperately trying to break through the Hollywood blockade.
We stepped into the vaporous, high-stakes writer's room, where Terminator Merlin was born through the painful process of narrative open-heart surgery.
We felt the primal, adrenaline-soaked fear of stuntmen dodging, adapting, problem-solving bulls.
We navigated the impossible 1-14 geopolitical math of Aurelius and Uther, witnessed the desperate spiritual war for the soul of the island, and finally we watched a man lose absolutely everything to become a legend.
As we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you with one final provocative concept to mull.
Throughout our sources, Lee Blalock paints a very vivid, romantic picture of independent creators. He frames them as scrappy, noble rebels, trying to build a new, vibrant cultural world from the ashes of a crumbling zombie Hollywood empire.
But as the story of Merlin violently demonstrates to us, tearing down an old world is an incredibly destructive process.
And building a new one requires a level of sacrifice that you might not be prepared to make.
Are we currently watching the difficult, messy birth of a brand new, decentralized galaxy of storytelling that will change how we consume culture forever?
Or are we just watching a few bright, desperate sparks flying off a dying fire before a new dark age of media returns?
That is the exact question you have to ask yourself the next time you sit down on your couch. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We invite you to look a little closer at the media and the specific platforms you choose to support, because sometimes the most fascinating classic stories are the exact ones the system is trying its absolute hardest to pretend do not exist. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.